Hello, everybody. It's George from Ireland. Well, thank you for coming back to my channel. This is about the shuttering of the Gulag History Museum in Moscow. And I regret I didn't go there when I had the chance. So it's in central Moscow, and it's been shut down on these spurious grounds about sort of fire safety violations. I mean, I was reading George Blake's autobiography, No Other Choice, again, and saying how in Russia there's this utter contempt and disregard for law, with this craven submission towards powerful people. And obviously Russia is really bad on health and safety, so it's a bogus reason. I mean, all right, maybe they are in breach of the fire safety regulations. I don't know, but the selectivity, the enforcement is telling. The Gulag, as in Glavania Lager, main camp. So it's about the slave labor system from the foundation of communism in Russia, and even before the Soviet Union as such was founded in 1922, whereby political dissidents could be sent there for years, often worked to death, sentences of decades occasionally. If they're going to kill you, they just shot you straight away. A trial before sometimes two intelligence officers, no defense counsel, and be shot hours later. Now, many people died in the Gulag, but they usually didn't die directly. They died from exhaustion. They died from malnutrition, lack of any medical care, insanitary conditions. They just lost the will to live because it was so hellish. But there are people who lived and were released after 14 years or 20 years or whatever. So, and they even these slaves who were just political dissidents or just for racist reasons, whatever their ethnicity, or sometimes accused of petty crimes like shoplifting or something like that. They built many of the major buildings in Moscow and elsewhere. They worked in coal mines. They built roads, canals, all this kind of stuff. It's an extremely cruel and exploitative system. So Stalin and his cronies could live in the lap of luxury. So no doubt it was slavery. I mean, usually it wasn't hereditary slavery. Anyway, so it's been shut down because it's very inconvenient for Putin, for people to realize that the Russian state and the Soviet successor state, that he adulates so much, was extremely unjust and cruel to its own people. And so this museum told you what life was like in the Gulag, why people were sent there. Sometimes they didn't even have a semblance of a hearing. It was a solely administrative process. One secret police officer simply signed that you're a whatever and you're gone. And there's no charge against you, no opportunity to defend yourself, no right of appeal. Sometimes you're held incommunicado. You couldn't get letters for years. Imagine being taken away from your family and your friends, put in a cattle car like the Nazis used to do. People sometimes died of heat or cold or whatever, or starvation, and this week-long journey to Siberia, Karaganda, and with put in this whatever cell with complete strangers and working from dawn till dusk. But what might keep you going is a letter from home, hope, love, and none of that for years. Of no idea what happened to your spouse, your children, or your parents, or whatever. But anyway, this Gulag, it brought prison cell doors from Vladimir Central Prison, not that far away from Moscow, from Butyrka likewise, and so on. And some from Krasnoyarsk, which is in Siberia, Dalstroy, and elsewhere. Anyway, it talked about the House of Construction Bureau and how people were sent to build things and stuff like that. Goodness. And there was this campaign, Last Address, as in people were sent to the Gulag and died there, whatever. The last known address, plaques put up with those places in Moscow. Now Putin's goons didn't like that one because there's a growing assault on truth and memory. So they can't commemorate those who suffered from the outrageous injustice and horrific cruelties of this barbaric communist system that Putin is so nostalgic for. Obviously, Stalin was a mass murderer, eclipsed only by Hitler. And because Stalinism was so bloodthirsty, that's why some people thought Nazism might not be as bad. And obviously, this came first. And people joined communism to fight Nazism, but Nazism to fight communism. And as communism came first, that's more exculpatory of those who joined the Nazis and those who joined the communism. Now, make no mistake, Nazism was absolutely horrific. I've got no time for that whatsoever. I don't hold a brief for National Socialism, acknowledge the Holocaust and its many other atrocities against many groups, not just Jews, but also gays and disabled people and Polish people and Russians and Ukrainians and all sorts, Jehovah's Witnesses, you name it. So we certainly do not want to go back to totalitarianism. Anyway, so totalitarianism is very bad news. Anyway, there was also used to be the Nikolskaya Street execution grounds and so on. And there was testimony up in this museum about people from people who were severely beaten up, even elderly people, even sick and disabled people. You see just how sadistic it was. Okay, goodness. And it tells you all these things, like a lot of Moscow State University was built by these slave laborers even in the 1950s. The system wasn't completely dismantled till the 1990s. Yeah. And point out that Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a writer later honored by Putin himself, was a victim of this simply because he wrote a letter, I think, criticizing Stalin. And that was enough to get 10 years in the camps, despite his valor in the Second World War. So you see how just absolutely appalling is how brutal they were to those who tried to make life better for ordinary people. How people had really had no rights at all, no freedom of expression, no right to join a trade union, as in one that could actually strike, no right to leave the country, even to move freely around the Soviet Union, no right to a fair hearing, no right to a remedy, very few property rights, no right to religious worship, and so on. So it's a harrowing tale of the most unimaginable suffering that millions and millions of people suffered. It doesn't go into the Holodomor, the Soviet policy of starving a significant segment of the Ukrainian population to death. Likewise, the Kazakhs, and indeed some ethnic Russians died in it too, and so on. And all these democratic politicians from Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and so on, straight to the Gulag. Very few of them survived. Yeah, that's why they've closed this down, because they don't want people to know just how bad Stalinism was. And obviously Putin appeals to nostalgia for Stalinism. So now they're going to focus on Nazi crimes during the Second World War, the Velikaya Otechestvennaya Vayna. And there's no question that the Third Reich did commit many appalling and large-scale atrocities in the Soviet Union, murdering civilians, knowing them to be civilians. This is not collateral damage. This is not firing at a proper military target, and then that happens to kill civilians as a byproduct. It's not a case of mistaken identity, knowing that what they're doing, rounding people up and shooting them dead, particularly Jews, but also those who are not Jewish, who are ethnically Belarusian, Russian, or Ukrainian. And the Ukrainians and the Belarusians suffered proportionally more than the Russians because they're further west, and so on. Or to gypsies, to Communist Party members, whoever else, and obviously forcing people into slave labor, large-scale rape, the industrial-scale use of torture. So I don't downplay that or dispute that one bit. But what my problem is how that you're just putting the spotlight on that, and then you're only telling half the story. Not that one genocide excuses another. No, they're both bad. This is not a tu quoque they're trying to use. So just how bad people were treated in the concentration camps, Soviet prisoners of war, sometimes murdered there, just reduced to walking skeletons, the most bestial cruelty imaginable. So I don't want to go back to that wickedness. Anyway, so obviously Putin wants to focus on foreign atrocities, not the atrocities of his own nation, and to somehow pretend that freedom in Ukraine has got some sort of link to the Third Reich, that if they have fair elections, that's Nazism. If they have an independent judiciary, that's Nazism. If they have free speech, that's Nazism. If they have real elections, that's Nazism, and so forth. If they have the right to strike, that's somehow Nazism. If you're not actually part of Russia, somehow that's Nazism, and so on. So it's all very, very worrying. Likewise, Memorial, another human rights organization, was closed down. So the Gulag Museum got an award from the Council of Europe in 2021. As in, that's an organization even Russia was part of at the time. They left in 2022 over the Ukraine war. And it also told about the mass murderers, Stalin's henchmen, and so on. Goodness. So it's very sad. And we can see why he wants this to be forgotten, because he wants to sort of continue committing similar atrocities. Very, very worrying. When it reopens, that will be a real sign of Russia coming back into the comity of nations. But I don't see it happening for decades.